There is a moment, quiet but seismic, when a person begins to realize that the life they're living is not truly their own. It may come during a sleepless night, a subtle inner revolt, or an unexpected breakdown in routine. This realization is not enlightenment, it is disorientation. You see your life like a script written by someone else's hand, and your role, once performed with pride, now feels like a subtle betrayal of your own being. For many, especially those labeled as the ideal child, this realization arrives late, delayed by years of applause for behavior that, in truth, was rooted in self-abandonment. From early on, you were taught which emotions were safe to express and which should remain hidden. Praise came not for authenticity but for obedience, for being easy, for not causing problems. Emotional complexity was discouraged, subtly penalized with silence or disappointment. What looked like good behavior was often a child's desperate strategy for survival, for earning love by becoming agreeable, convenient, and harmless. In this quiet performance, a false self is formed. Not a lie but a mask, crafted with precision to fit the desires of others. Carl Jung spoke of the persona, the social face we wear to navigate society. But beneath this mask, the repressed parts of the self, the anger, the fear, the grief, the unmet needs, begin to accumulate like psychic debris. These denied aspects do not disappear. They retreat into the unconscious, becoming what Jung called the shadow, the buried side of the psyche that, when ignored, returns in symptoms, compulsions, emotional fatigue, and deep existential confusion. Perfectionism becomes a form of armor, polished, impenetrable, admired. But it is heavy. The child who learns to be perfect learns simultaneously not to be whole. They deny their messiness, their vulnerability, their contradictions. And with that, they begin to lose access to something essential: their spontaneity, their truth, their sense of aliveness. The need to be accepted becomes the silent dictator of their behavior. They adapt. They please. But they forget how to feel their own wants. And in adulthood, this survival strategy turns into a crisis of identity. When the applause fades, when real choices arise, when the world demands not just performance but presence, they feel hollow. They don't know what they want because they were never taught that they were allowed to want. This is not just a personal issue, it's a cultural one. Our society often confuses politeness with virtue, obedience with goodness, and self-denial with maturity. But as Jung warned, what we repress will eventually control us from the shadows. The child who learned to suppress conflict becomes the adult who avoids confrontation at the cost of their own truth. And that avoidance breeds anxiety, depression, emotional disconnection, and above all, a haunting question: who am I if I am no longer who others want me to be? This is the existential breaking point, the place where individuation begins. It's painful, disorienting, but necessary. Because to reclaim yourself, you must first face the self you buried. And that journey begins not with rebellion, but with an act of radical honesty, admitting that the version of you who never gave trouble was not your whole truth, only your safest one. Let's go deeper. Section 1: The Adult Collapse of the Ideal Child. As an adult, they may appear outwardly successful. They've learned to perform the role they were taught, to live by the script handed down to them. But internally, they're adrift, unable to cope with the very emotions that should have been nurtured in childhood. In their formative years, they learned that compliance meant love and approval, that obedience kept them safe. This conditioning didn't build resilience, it built a fragile self. As the years pass, they may have accumulated achievements, but beneath the surface, there's a profound disorientation. They are haunted by a quiet sense of failure, as though they're always one mistake away from being exposed. Deep down, they fear that their worth is tied only to their external actions and others' opinions. Mistakes feel like a threat not just to their image but to their very identity. Their emotional toolkit, never fully developed, remains stunted, unable to handle the complexity of adult life. In their eyes, any failure feels catastrophic, confirming their deepest fear, that without the mask of perfection they are nothing. What they fail to realize is that the emotional immaturity they carry is not inherent. It was the result of neglect, the neglect of their emotional development in favor of outward harmony. They were never given the space to confront and process anger, grief, or insecurity. Instead, these feelings were quietly buried under layers of good behavior. This emotional suppression was a survival mechanism, but now, as adults, it is a crippling handicap. The inability to navigate conflict without fear, to fail without shame, to disappoint without guilt. These are the invisible weights they carry. Instead of facing these emotions, they avoid them, retreating into perfectionism. The act of failing, or even just the fear of it, becomes an existential crisis. They live in constant anxiety, not because they are inherently weak, but because their emotional foundation was never allowed to develop into maturity. The inability to express anger or frustration, to challenge the status quo, to disappoint others without feeling irreparably damaged. This is the prison of their past, a prison that controls their present. In Jungian terms, this is the unconscious mind holding them hostage. The child who learned that perfection brought love never fully embraced the shadow, the hidden side of the psyche that contains all the suppressed parts of themselves. Now, as an adult, they are living out the consequences of that repression. This is what Jung referred to when he said, "Until we make the unconscious conscious, we call it fate." Their life has been dictated by unconscious forces, the unresolved emotions of their past, the hidden fears and desires they were taught to deny. What should have been a journey of individuation, a process of integrating all parts of themselves into wholeness, has instead become a battle for survival. They are not just haunted by the fear of failure, they are haunted by the belief that failing will destroy them entirely. And so, they continue to perform, continue to hide, but they are dying inside. The truth they've buried is now demanding to be seen. The next step is to break this pattern by confronting the emotions that have been long suppressed. This is where the journey of individuation begins. Section 2. Gratitude, Guilt, and the Invisible Chains. The emotional battle faced by the ideal child is often one that many cannot even name, because it hides beneath the surface of their daily interactions with their parents. This conflict isn't loud, it's quiet. It's the subtle, constant pull between love and obligation. You feel this tension most acutely when you consider making a choice that's contrary to the expectations of your parents, especially when those choices involve stepping into a life that's distinctly your own. There's this heavy sense of guilt that lingers in the air, making you second-guess yourself every time you dare to break away, even if only slightly, from their desires. You love them, but there's a part of you that resents this unspoken debt you feel to them. The debt of having been raised, of having been supported, of having been loved in ways that are not necessarily whole or free. But here lies the crux of it all, the deep confusion between gratitude and servitude. Your parents gave you life, gave you shelter, gave you guidance, and for that, you feel an overwhelming sense of gratitude. This gratitude is healthy at its core, but when it becomes tied to guilt, when it transforms into an unspoken bond that demands your obedience, it ceases to be gratitude and becomes a form of self-subjugation. You struggle with this contradiction. How can you truly love them when it feels like loving them means becoming a version of yourself that doesn't really exist? You want to stand on your own 2 feet, make decisions that reflect your own desires, but you cannot shake the feeling that doing so will somehow betray the love they gave you. The emotional weight of this is immense, and yet, it's never quite acknowledged. There's no external rebellion, no shouting match, just a quiet internal surrender that you might not even realize is happening. This tension becomes the root of the indecision you often feel in your adult life. Autonomy, true autonomy, is a form of emotional freedom, yet it's tangled with the deep-seated belief that to be free from parental expectations is to be ungrateful. You may be paralyzed in the face of even the simplest decisions. Should I move away for a better job? Should I marry someone they disapprove of? The more you attempt to carve out a path that's independent of them, the more you feel as if you're breaking some unspoken rule. A rule that says you owe them everything, including your ability to choose for yourself. This is the invisible chain that binds you, the expectation that your life is a reflection of their desires, and when you move in a direction that isn't aligned with their dreams for you, you feel an invisible, suffocating guilt. This guilt becomes an internalized force that keeps you from stepping fully into your own life, because deep inside, you are afraid that severing these ties, no matter how unhealthy they may be, will equate to abandonment, to rejection, to ungratefulness. Jung speaks to the deeper layers of this relationship when he says that true fidelity allows for difference. True love, real, mature love, is not about shrinking yourself to fit the mold of someone else's vision for you. It's about allowing yourself to grow in front of them, not beneath them. But this requires the courage to stand apart, to make decisions that may cause discomfort, and to bear the burden of guilt that often comes with choosing your path over their expectations. In that moment of choosing yourself, there is liberation, but there is also fear. The child who has always existed to please, to be the ideal version in their parents' eyes, must now face the existential reality of being a separate person. This is where the individuation process truly begins, by confronting the roots of that guilt and choosing to honor your own emotional sovereignty, even if it means disappointing those you love most. The pain of breaking free is real, but it is necessary, and it is a step forward in the journey of reclaiming your authentic self. Section 3. The power of saying no and the beginning of individuation. The act of saying no holds more power than one might realize, especially for someone who has spent their entire life saying yes out of fear. Fear of rejection. Fear of disappointment. Fear of not being loved. For the child who never gave trouble, no wasn't just a word, it was a potential threat to their very existence. They learned early on that to maintain harmony, to stay in the good graces of their parents, they had to comply. This yes was never truly given from the self, but from a place of survival, a survival mechanism that shielded them from conflict and emotional abandonment. The deeper irony is that every yes uttered out of fear is a silent betrayal of their authentic self. Each yes is an unconscious act of self-neglect, an unspoken erosion of personal boundaries. They may have mastered the art of compliance, but in doing so, they lost touch with the essence of who they are. They were never allowed to define themselves by what they chose to say no to, only by what they could do to please others. This is where individuation, the journey of becoming the whole integrated self, begins. Individuation demands boundaries, and boundaries often come in the form of saying no. But for someone who has been conditioned to please, this feels terrifying. Saying no feels like the collapse of the very foundation of their relationships, the unraveling of the stability that was built upon their compliance. But the truth is that without boundaries there is no self. They've spent so much of their life molding themselves to meet the needs and desires of others that their identity has become obscured, like a reflection in a cracked mirror. The healing process starts with the ability to say no, to assert what they will and will not tolerate, to honor their own needs even when it risks displeasing others. This act of defiance is not an act of rebellion against others, but an act of deep love for oneself. It's the recognition that their needs and desires are as valid as anyone else's, and that the foundation of healthy relationships is built on mutual respect, not on one-sided sacrifice. By learning to say no, they begin to reclaim the agency that was stolen from them. They begin to step into their own life, to define themselves on their own terms. The ultimate transformation occurs when they stop seeking the approval of others and start seeking wholeness instead. This is the true meaning of freedom, not the freedom to sever ties or destroy relationships, but the freedom to stop pretending. Freedom lies in no longer being trapped by the illusion of perfection. The child who never gave trouble may have been taught that perfection was the only way to earn love, but perfection is not real. It is a mask, a prison built on false premises. When they begin to shed the layers of perfection and say no to the pressure to remain flawless, they take the first step toward becoming who they truly are. They may stumble, they may feel guilty, but in that stumbling, they discover their own strength. For the first time, they have the power to choose their own path, to create their own identity, and to live with integrity to themselves. The process of individuation is not about abandoning relationships or rejecting their past. It is about breaking free from the illusion of what they should be, and instead, embracing the messy, imperfect truth of who they are. With the power to assert their boundaries, the true journey begins, the journey of healing, growth, and self-discovery.